connecting the Daudu to Bobrisky is not merely speculative. Right from the comment section of the video on YouTube, you find comments where the viewing audience drew a beeline from the film character to Bobrisky. They instantly associated the character on television with the personality they filtered through the show glass of Instagram, just as the film intended. And when they asked the director of Daudu, who played the lead role in the story, right, like why he was glorifying a practice that he considered aberrant to African culture, this is what he said. He said about the film is make-believe and they are trying to correct certain topics and that people should watch the film carefully, right? The circumstances that led the lead actor to be gay is what they are preaching against. In the understanding of the filmmaker, and as expressed in his idea of the real message, the becoming of homosexuality is not so much biological, but also spiritual. On one hand, the film reminds our society that places premium on the male child, that gender selection through enigmatic means can open up child's destiny to prenatal manipulation, resulting in woeful consequences. On the other hand, the film and all the prayers made on behalf of the character to be straightened is also part of the filmmaker's anxiety for masculinity to remain masculine, a desire that the glamorous existence and the massive popularity of Bobrisky challenges. Whether as a fictionalized character or an actual one, Bobrisky comes within the range of the viewer's sight through the spectacularizing display screen of electronic devices. She's well within our social and discursive orbit, even while out of our physical touch. Unlike the fictional version, Bobrisky did not merely come to us as a helpless victim of spiritual manipulation. She came with money, a tactic that demonstrates her implicit understanding of Nigeria. For all our claims about African values, we also worship money. A universal solvent, money dissolves even our strongest claims of virtue. Bobrisky did not appear on the social scene as a stereotypical cross-dresser, appealing to public conscience for acceptance. She spun tolerance based on collective virtues and determined her own terms of public acceptance. Elsewhere, people who transition their gender take up an activist cause to fight the oppressive establishment on behalf of other marginalized groups, but not Bobrisky. She was always a glammed-up doll, a sharp wit matched by a quick tongue, and a made for contemporary feminism Barbie doll rolling in wads of cash. Knowing that you're not considered a figure of power in the Nigerian political culture if you do not claim the backing of some shadowy forces, Bobrisky's earlier appearance on the social scene alludes to an unseen godfather, a bae, and it still emerges in the context of trials with a House of Representatives. It does not matter if those shadow backers exist or not. What counts is how Bobrisky understood Nigeria and how she mirrored us back to ourselves. Bobrisky was a biological male who, by transitioning into a female, signaled to a patriarchal society that manhood was not the ultimate prize that they have long been socialized into believing. That made a lot of men panic about the destabilization of gender science, and they gradually churned from bemused observers into avid persecutors. Their discomfort with Bobrisky's whittling down manhood and opting for femininity means that masculinity can be treated as another gift of nature that could be accepted or rejected. For the men whose entire identity revolves around their gender, she was an abomination personified. She did not only become feminized, but she was also living as a woman who possesses something beyond biology that a man also needs for him to be called a man: economic power. For the men whose masculinity gets daily abridged by the emasculating Nigerian economic situation, Bobrisky's gender fluidity and wealth must have been collectively torturous. It is in the light of this that Portable song about Bobrisky being a disgrace to the brotherhood resonated with a section of them. The song was a ridicule and advocating for violence against the feminized man. Now, the scope of the anxiety about ambiguated gender and the desire to see a man restored to manliness had incidentally been prefigured in Daudu. The content of the story was one of the ways they did this. Another way they achieved that was through the various distancing techniques built into the plot line and visual aesthetics to protect the integrity of the male actor who acted like a woman. Alienation effect is a dramatic theory by the German director Bertolt Brecht. It is the use of techniques to keep the audience from emotional involvement in the play by reminding them of the artificiality of the performance. And examples of such techniques include breaking character or using artifices that control audience perception of the event reflected in the drama. Daudu's body as a feminized character was managed by the director by ensuring that the representation of gay identity bounced off, it was placed at a distance, it was caricatured, and it bounced off the actor. We did not see the how and when of his becoming gay. The gendered act he supposedly performed were not shown to be social or innate. Despite all the artifice of femininity the actor put on, he still retained the symbolic vestiges of his masculinity. He was also extremely timid at the suggestions of sex. He turned down sexual proposition at least 3 times, and on one occasion even summoned the police against gay men. The character never had sex in the film, which is quite normal for Nigerian films. No showing, lots of telling, but the sex was very much there in the innuendos about anal penetration. None of these things were treated, contemplatively, just a play for laughs. The representation of Daudu's body throughout the film, while he was feminized and when he was restored at the end, showed an awareness that the character could become the actor outside the diegetic circumstances of the film, and they preempted this by making the gay man a mere caricature. Now, if the film's version of a distressed masculinity could be so neatly resolved, reality has proven to be a different beast. Bobrisky has adamantly refused to be compelled by the power prayers offered through these various entities in popular culture. Despite society's resorting to the almighty power of the law, Bobrisky has maintained a defiance about her being female. And this is her tweet, Instagram post very recently, talking about herself as a strong woman. Her stubbornness so far has shed some light on our society's obsession with the penis and the anxieties around masculinity. Here is why. After she was arrested, people asked if her dress could be lifted just for them to see what was underneath. At the sentencing, the judge asked for a clarification of her gender identity. She replied male, and you could see these men on social media rejoice at this reversion to masculine default. By saying she was a male when the judge asked, Bobrisky probably thought she could assuage the judge's slighted sensibilities and be shown some understanding. Unfortunately, she never had a chance with a judge who was fighting some other culture war. Even after she was jailed, the brigade of slighted males still followed up to inquire what was between her legs. A journalist called the prison where she was incarcerated to ask invasive questions. The prison warders who should have told off the journalist gave details, and the journalist publishes it. Several media houses and blogs happily reproduce the revelation of, this person's private. And on social media, you see them circulating the news and rejoicing at how they have humiliated a defector. Now to the second part of my question. So what happens when prayer fails? First, in religious studies, prayer is never taken to have failed. What happens when people state their desires before a transcendent power and it still does not manifest is that they rework such desires into a different system of valuation that allows management of the emotional and psychological fallout of not getting exactly what they asked. In the case of Bobrisky, the expenditure of prayers has not guaranteed the expected returns of forcing this person to become male back. And drawing on the calculative mode of revaluing prayers under a cost-benefit analysis, I speculate 2 possible conclusions to Bobrisky's travels with society, and neither one mirrors the resolution of the film, Daudu. Pessimistically, his distractors will keep trying. As long as the internal contradictions of the Nigerian state itself remains, the law will continue to be mobilized to service religious sustained norms and oppressive instinct will never stop finding refuge in the law and an alibi in the so-called African culture. Optimistically, and please consider this also part of my own prayers too, the impasse too will be the breaking point where the insistence on overriding individual agency gets rethought after the prayers that have been rendered as both moral persuasion and coercion through the law fails, rather than an insistence on conformity to a singular truth of gender identity or sustaining belief in the spiritual process that predestines gender, they will hopefully finally come to recognize the force of individual human will in shaping their own individual destiny. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Adelakum, and we'll now move to the presentation by Dr. Arwoman.
Can you see my screen?
We can.
Okay.
It is, but you might, yeah, okay, good.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Oluwayinka, and I'm excited to share my insights on strategic ambiguities as survival strategies in becoming Bobrisky. So some key terms include strategic ambiguity, which is the deliberate use of vague language to achieve specific goals. Gender and sexual expression, which are social constructs of how individuals manifest their gender and sexual identity. And heteronormativity, which is the belief that heterosexuality is the default or preferred orientation. So I'm arguing that in the transition of Idris to Bobrisky, strategic ambiguity has become a crucial rhetorical and practical communicative tool. It has not only just contributed to Bobrisky's desired success, but also serves as a protective mechanism in the Nigerian society, given the social, cultural, and political factors that privilege heteronormativity. So such strategic ambiguity seems to evolve based on the context. So I analyzed 6 interviews Bobrisky granted with Adesua. There should be a W there in 2016, Dele Momodu in 2020, Chud in 2021, Toke Makinwa in 2023, and Isbeyu twice in 2024. So I'm looking at the exigencies that necessitated the use of strategic ambiguity for Bobrisky, the manifestations in Bobrisky's communication, the functions and the broader implication for gender expectations and sexual expression. So some of these things, the panelists, the previous speakers, they've touched on it. So a quick overview of Bobrisky's evolution. In 2016, the interview with Adesua, Bobrisky identified as a man. He explicitly stated that he's not gay. He shared the hopes of being a father and getting married to a very pretty woman and having a daughter. And he also plans to stop wearing makeup, and according to him, he plans to be serious in another 5 years. He insists that his cross-dressing is solely for business and entertainment purposes and refuses the label being gay at that time. So fast forward to 2024, we see a dramatic shift in the physical appearance of Bobrisky, who in recent interviews expressed enjoyment of their lifestyle with no intention of stopping. We can also see that Bobrisky's followership, financial power, and flack have increased. So such evolutions, especially because it's obvious, requires Bobrisky to adopt strategic ambiguity as communicative tool, especially because these interviews are digitally mediated. So when one of the presenters was talking about Bobrisky identifying as transgender in a blog, it's interesting that in some of the interviews, Bobrisky is more careful as to tag himself as a transgender person. Several factors influence Bobrisky's use of strategic ambiguity, which manifest in forms of evading questions, selective disclosure, deflecting, distracting from the main question, sometimes denial, sometimes using humor and sarcasm to deflect serious question or lighten the tone of the interview. and lots of contradictory statements, especially when you look at the different interviews, also showing the evolution or evolving that has happened. The interview context also play an important role, with Bobrisky being more open in relaxed settings and more guarded in some other contexts. So since these interviews are digitally mediated, they impact the level of strategic communication. The sensitivity of the topic also determines the degree of ambiguity, with increased vagueness when it comes to discussing gender, sexuality, sex, sexual practices. So Bobrisky tries to evade questions that, of course, the audience are really curious as to what is beneath you. The obsession with the penis, for instance, as the previous speaker mentioned. So strategic ambiguity has intensified with Bobrisky's evolution and self-presentation in various contexts. So for instance, in his interview with Adesua, Bobrisky openly acknowledged that, oh, I have no boobs. And in recent interviews, would see that Bobrisky evades or deflects around his physical appearance. So when questions about physical changes arise, Bobrisky would always talk about doing surgeries to become more feminine, elevate their look. However, they do not go into details about the exact nature of the change, which has opened up to different interpretation. So even in discussing business, we see that there are some form of ambiguity. Initially, you would get details about the kinds of business Bobrisky was into, but now they are unclear about specific business details and mention making money from rich partners without clarifying the nature of the relationship between them. So when it comes to gender identity, you get a lot of deflection, questions about pronouns. Bob is more unclear about that. So in some instances, she accepts to be she, and in other instances, she deflects and says, whatever people call me is fine. So you can also see that as I talk about the evolution, I'm going between he, she, and they. So Bob is very evasive about current relationships and swears to keep it secret. This ambiguity is rhetorical in the sense that Bobrisky is aware of their sociocultural context and uses it as a response to the exigency aimed at achieving certain purposes, trying to control their own narrative. And the function of strategic ambiguity is multifaceted for Bobrisky, who usually emphasize that they are going to maintain curiosity, controversies, and this enigmatic personality to keep them in the business and trendy, maintaining their celebrity status. So given the complex context in which Bobrisky navigates, both digitally and physically, strategic ambiguity provides the legal protection to avoid potential issues, especially with the country with strict anti-LGBTQ laws. By openly identifying, for instance, can be dangerous, so ambiguity provides some form of protection. So with ambiguity, it allows for deniability. And if Bobrisky is not being explicit about the gender, the transitions, and same-sex activity, these are all strategies to ensure that he stays clear of trouble to avoid being punished. We can see that with the recent arrest, it was about spraying money and not, it doesn't have to do directly with the gender expectation or sexual expressions. So with strategic ambiguity and the deniability that it allows and the openness, open interpretations, it is difficult to charge Bobrisky for transgressive gender expressions or same-sex activity. And such flexibility with strategic ambiguity allows Bobrisky to navigate different social and professional spaces. So by keeping people guessing, Bobrisky maintains this public interest and relevance, and also enhances their market appeal to different audiences. So for instance, while he claims relationship with older women are solely for business, and also asserts that gender expressions are just for entertainment purposes, even in recent interviews, and you always see the appeal back to money, economic power. And so strategic ambiguity has given some affordances to Bobrisky, especially because these interviews are in public spaces. Most importantly, I think through ambiguity, Bobrisky subtly challenges societal norms without direct confrontation. So beyond Bobrisky as an individual, there are larger implications for this. Strategic ambiguity as adopted shows that there are challenges to binary thinking. And we can see this even in audience responses to the ambivalent attitude towards what Bobrisky stands for. We can also see a lot of contradictions that some of the speakers have addressed, contradictions in terms of the state itself, contradictions in terms of the personality of Bobrisky, contradictions even among the audience. So it exposes the societal contradiction both at personal level as well as societal level. It also reveals the complexity with gender and sexuality, especially when it intersects with economic class and celebrity status. So this dynamics is further complicated by the global conversations on gender and sexuality. For instance, with global reporting, you would see terms like trans woman, transgender socialite, transgender celebrity, and Bobrisky uses none of these terms directly. So it also demonstrates that even though Nigeria seems to be a strict sociocultural context, individuals tend to navigate these rules differently. It's only because Bobrisky has this public figure. That's why it's like the bone of contention. But we definitely have non-conforming bodies and identities that have to grapple with the ideas of navigating their identity and lives in the Nigerian context. However, it's crucial to note that strategic ambiguity does have its implication. Excuse me. It's difficult to do this two at the same time. For instance, Bobrisky has often been criticized for not being explicitly supportive of LGBTQ rights, while only using the trans appearances for economic or brand purposes. At times, his ambiguity also inadvertently reinforces harmful gender or sexual stereotypes regarding gender non-conforming individuals. As also seen with the recent events surrounding him, ambiguity does not completely protect from legal consequences. So as we continue to grapple with the questions of gender, sexuality, identity, especially in the digital age, Bobrisky's transition from Idris to becoming a more controversial public figure highlights the affordances alongside the limitation that is inherent within strategic ambiguity, particularly when challenging assumptions and pushing boundaries surrounding social norms. So while it serves as survival strategy, it also forms a way of challenging societal norms. So Bobrisky as a case study has shown that individuals definitely enact communication strategies through which they navigate complex social, cultural, and legal context. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you as well, Dr. Arolomu. And as soon as you, get your screen down, thank you. We will move to the next presentation by Dr. Onanuga.
Yeah, all right. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. And I mean, it's been an exciting time listening to the different presentations. I also want to appreciate the invitation by Professor Obadari and Yeku to this event. Yeah, so my discussion would be about, of course, Bobrisky, and I'm looking at the risk and the risky from a linguistic perspective, because I'm in language studies. Obviously, a number of the things I'll be discussing already, of course, overlap with some of the previous discussions. Yeah, but it's interesting to see how, across disciplines and studies, these realities are sort of commonplace. And so by providing a sort of background to how queerness is legislated in Nigeria, you look at the SSMP of 2014 and how it sought to legalize homophobia and ordering of queer identifying people. Of course, this has roots in colonial laws, and they continue to influence how Nigerians react to queerness. It links to earlier discussions, and it's interesting to have Professor Godil here because some of his studies have examined how some pre-colonial societies on the African continent have been embracing or accepting of queer identities, and they also recognize the fluidity of identities. So despite the challenges that come with the physical space for queer identifying Nigerians, the digital space is sort of rupturing these discrimination, and of course enhancing queer livability. And so on the digital space, as well in literary writings and filmic presentations, you see all of this. And so in today's presentation, I'll be looking at how the question would be, would our popular Nigerian blogs also fulfill the same functions of providing queer visibility, aiding queer activism, or do they simply just rehash, the stereotypes? And so, of course, I see blogs as being part of the online ecology, and of course, to paraphrase Adenekon, says the internet is becoming the gathering point of desires and dreams of contemporary Africa. It's also an archive of sin, pleasures, and pains, a free space for marginalized bodies, and a performative site of contestation and contradiction. Yeah, so, and I mean, to also contextualize the Nigerian blog sphere, I'm asking, are they amplifying voices, or do you want to see them as just lousy busybodies? Because I mean, almost everyone has an axe to grind with, the Nigerian blogs. And so, but of course, they're actually very critical platforms in the amplification of diverse voices. Of course, in most cases, simply going with the stereotypes about queerness. But like Professor Sulegia and Mark Precht discussed in their study, there is this sustained curiosity about queerness and difference in Nigeria. And so a lot of these blogs also, feed into these because they are mostly just interested in viralizing their content and gaining traffic, and it's more or less for the financial gains. And so in subsequent slides, I want to look at how Nigerian blogs, particularly Gistlover, Instablog, and Linda AKG, present and document Bobrisky, using Bobrisky's self-presentation and how his publicly shared materials are reproduced. How these materials are framed towards public engagement and the implication of these blog presentations to the sustenance of discriminatory practices towards people queer identifying Nigerians. Yeah, so of course, I mean, this Bobrisky has been the subject of our discussion so far. She's a Nigerian socialite media personality who, of course, frontally challenges the gender norms in Nigeria, and is always, very flamboyant and bold. And like previous speakers have also identified, it's reminiscent of areas scattered from the 1970s, and Derili Edun, who also presents in the same format. And so, but Bobrisky's controversial persona, of course, always sparks conversations about gender, about sexuality, and societal acceptance. And of course, the fact that people engage these also reflects the evolving cultural landscape in Nigeria. But Bobrisky's rise, of course, through Snapchat, highlights the power of social media and how this can reshape perceptions of gender identity and, of course, sustain discussions on inclusion and diversity. So, starting first with Bobrisky's self-presentation and identity formation, of course, through her shares on Instagram, you see the evolution, like Dr. Arawumo just talked about now, from the very dark-skinned, very innocent-looking cross-dresser, and to the current reality of being extremely light-skinned, voluptuous almost, and are constantly bragging about our looks and how it has fetched success financially and in terms of social mobility. Yeah, so you see the evolution of the trans identity through makeup and dressing, and again, evoking Ololade Fani's internalized homophobia. And I mean, I was actually surprised when people ask questions on, Bobrisky's internalized homophobia. She's never kept it a secret at all through different interviews and posts. For instance, here, she says, "I'm not gay." Of course, this was 2016, 2017. She says, "I'm not gay." No, I'm not gay. I think it's because of my look. Outside Nigeria, like the UK and America, they don't find this new. So they were simply referring to their, outward presentation and saying that, of course, it's a recognition of the toxicity of the Nigerian environment, and coming out to say I'm gay at that point would have had serious implications on their existence. I mean, there are lots of documented attacks on queer identifying Nigerians. So particularly when she had gained the celebrity status, it could have crashed the brand. And I mean, this would also reflect to Tenny Makanaki's incident about 2 years back, where there were allegations that she's lesbian, and I mean, it really could have consequences on the brand as a celebrity. Another very fascinating thing about Bobrisky is how she sustains or tries to control the narrative about herself in the public. So again, she speaks about being mommy of Lagos, which is to arrogate some power to herself as being, the go-to person in Lagos. And of course, we know that Lagos is the popular cultures capital of Nigeria. And she also, constantly refers to herself as a beautiful baby girl, and she's a woman, And there are lots of name dropping in public engagement. Popularly, I mean, she refers to Senator B as one of the person who bankrolls activities, and then she regales the public with how much she makes. And this would, of course, question the performativity of identity. I mean, is this all just for money? She never disputes that. She says, all I want to do is make money, and I represent what I'm selling. And so all of these coalesce into looking at the privilege of acceptance and mainstreaming. For instance, until recently, she has appeared virtually untouchable. She has graced high-profile events and red carpet shows. She has appeared in Nollywood films, featured in music videos. And so the question would be, do economic and social capital shield from social judgment in Nigeria, particularly when you look at the widespread queerphobia in the country? But of course, looking at our recent travels, you could see that, I mean, it's like people want to seize the opportunity to say, yeah, finally we got you. I mean, you've been getting away with this for so long, and the feeling is, I mean, it's always online that she has the backing of powerful people. There are always insinuations that she's in cahoots with politicians, so it was difficult to really subject her to what the average queer person would experience. And maybe part of the privilege that has come with this prestige of the privilege is, why Bobrisky probably also never really identified with the Nigerian queer community. Within the blogs that I engaged, there were lots of things on, sensational headlines, just to, I mean, again, to draw attention and to go viral. So at the point when Bobrisky was announced as the best dressed female, there was a huge uproar. People reacted to say, why would it be Bobrisky? Why should Bobrisky become the epitome of femininity in Nigeria? And then, of course, at the point of imprisonment too, there were a lot of people who are interested in knowing what part of the prison should be. Would she be with the men, particularly when she responded in the court that she's a man? And so, I mean, it took away from the sentencing itself. This is someone who was sentenced for spraying naira, of course, absurd, because this is what happens every weekend in Nigeria. So all of a sudden, it's Bobrisky's becoming the scapegoat. But the attention was taken away from the sentencing itself to wanting to find out exactly what is happening in prison. Where is she going to be taken to? And then, of course, I mean, this has persisted, and it's morphing into an even bigger issue currently. Early references to Bobrisky again in the blogs were more about cross-dressing. So you'd find references that simply said Bobrisky, the cross-dresser. Until recently, I think there were so few blogs that mentioned transgender until very recently. But what was more fascinating in the narrative was how pronouns were used. When Bobrisky posted, she always used she, and interestingly, in the blogs, you find the up and down use of he, she, him, her. As I mean, I saw it more or less as a way of rejecting Bobrisky's self-representation because they felt it did not, it wasn't acceptable. I mean, if he said he's a man, then why should he use a feminine pronoun? And you found Yeah, I mean, there were lots of these. I made those in Reading, and so you had these sustained movement from he and she, and then even in the headline here, Bobrisky weeps bitterly, wants blogger to quit posting about him or her, and then he said he shared new photos of himself. Okay, yeah, when Bobrisky shared photos of herself. But they kept referring to her as he. I mean, sort of as a way of saying, well, you said that about yourself, but we don't agree with you. And so I say pronouns are important aspects of how language shapes identity. But I mean, however, by intentionally ignoring Bobrisky's choice of female attribution or using the gender neutral pronouns they, them, the blogs persist with their labeling of Bobrisky. And in a lot of the blog posts, you've found lots of, several homophobic or transphobic slurs. I intentionally didn't want to repost them here because I thought they were just not decent. But such, offensive use of language sustain or perpetuate discrimination and marginalization to the person of Bobrisky and by extension, queer identifying Nigerians. I don't know, like how many minutes more do I have? There is this very short clip that, speaks about Bobrisky and how she's looking to take charge. So this is a video of the house opening where she had some Muslim clerics come around. Yeah, so it's done. Yeah, so here again you see, I mean, for me it's like Bobrisky looking to take charge. And part of the spaces where queer identifying people really get a lot of backlash is through recourse to religion. And here is Bobrisky, using religion as a way of mainstreaming. And so, I mean, it still goes back to the privilege or the prestige of our person. So it's a way of deconstructing religion and, self-assertion, more or less. So across the blog post, I say that there are lots of presentational or representational ambivalence. These blogs present as platforms for social morality, and so they seek to control the public narratives about queerness. Negative presentations are usually owed to legal and religious cultural opposition to queerness. There is lots of, rage farming, which is, using content creation to stoke public reactions and get people charged. And again, to reference again and Eprecht, they made mention of, harvesting curiosity and using Bobrisky's media fandom for viralization. Maybe a short question would be that with the reactions to Bobrisky, how would we distinguish ordinary cross-dressing in skits for entertainment purposes and genuine, queer identity in real life? So in conclusion, I'm saying that Bobrisky's self-representation and digital visibility have implications for queer identifying Nigerians. And from real life experience, from people who are queer identifying in Nigeria, some of whom I've spoken with, they've reported that Bobrisky's current challenge with the government has influenced reactions to them in the public space. So people are more willing to attack or assault queer identifying Nigerians just because they can see that, even the most visible queer identifying Nigerian is being subjected to harassment by security agencies. And so there is also the tense polemics of intersection of the private and public personality of Bobrisky and the representations in the media. And of course, this is just general, the need to recognize the realities and safety concerns of queer identifying Nigerians since the environment seeks to invalidate their humanity. And I ask as conclusion, what are the implications of Bobrisky's current travels on queer livability in Nigeria? Thank you very much.
Yeah, again, thank you, and thank you to all the presenters. And just as the last session, if you have questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And you can also, if you wish, raise your hand. I will just start off by noting, while you're gathering your thoughts and typing your questions, that as a social psychologist, as I was listening to the entire set of things today, I was wondering about one of the titles of this particular session, the antinomies, difficult word for me, antinomies of self-fashioning, the implications of individual self-fashioning and the pressures that go with that. A lot of the presentations today are speaking about how those have resonance throughout the cultural ecology that then informs the self-fashioning that people do. This doesn't, their self-fashioning and the pressures or motivations that they encounter, of course, reverberate throughout the system. And I think this notion of a strategic ambiguity is interesting because I was contemplating this strategic element of it and to what extent sometimes, of course, it's definitely strategic in some cases, but to what extent is also a reflection of experience and not just a kind of strategic presentation, which is that kind of notion makes it seem as if it's inauthentic. And then, if strategic, how conscious is the strategy and how unconscious is the strategy, which I think is an interesting idea. And reverberating through that notion of strategic is an idea I think that was also struck me listening to the presentations of kind of a certain kind of essentialism, not necessarily of gender and sexual essentialism, which of course is evident in the phenomena and presentations, but also about personal and individual identity itself. And I think this kind of essentialism of identity was evident in questions about performance versus genuine being, and questions of singularity versus the multiplicity of identity, and questions about the entativity versus the fluidity, not only of social identities, but also of personal identity itself, that people may not be a kind of, that they can, that they also have a fluid sense of their identity. So with that, I think those are not any questions really, but just a set of observations that I think are also interesting pieces of the presentations in this session and throughout the day. So looking through the chat and the questions, we have some people with hands raised. So we'll go to first Aston, if you can please give your question. And then we will take a few questions and then ask for answers.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me, please?
Yes.
Oh, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to say a lovely presentation from all of the panelists. This is an interesting dialogue. My first question actually was for Dr. Taiwo. During his presentation, I think he mentioned a couple of things about Aoism and in reference to how Aoism talked about the governed being governed or something like that. I'm not sure I got everything, verbatim. Then I think he made a reference to scholarly works that might have dealt with or not dealt with Aoism in that regard. I stand to be corrected. I wanted his more clarity in that regard, because I think my first foray into Aoism in that light, I believe there might be some things to support that, as with other authors too. So I would love to hear his take on that. Then second question to Dr. Taiwo as well. There was some reference to Bobrisky in terms of the question that the judge asked Bobrisky, trying to ascertain or confirm Now, I can't really suppose and say this is what the judge was thinking about, but I wanted to know, because I think, I mean, I stand to be corrected again. I think he mentioned something about the appropriateness of that question. So that caught my attention. I wanted to know if you could please try and expand on that. Then the third question that I have is more towards the convener of this colloquium. I would like to know if there's in the future, if there are plans to kind of create a more divergent view and opinion. The reason I say that is because I've been listening to the speakers, and it appears to me that there's been a general consensus, even though I think Dr. Ebenezer also mentioned that they were open to other varying views. I would love to see that in the future, if they could accommodate some divergent views from other seemingly opposing thoughts too. That's then the other thing I had, question number 4 that I had.
Could you
Please, yeah.
Could you please expand on that? What are those quote unquote other divergent views?
I don't have any quote unquote one in particular, but I remember that you mentioned at some point that when one of the questionnaires towards you was to the effect that if you had reached out to Bobrisky. Am I correct by that, sir?
Yes, yes.
All right. So, and I think
let me address that. And sorry, I don't want to hijack the panel.
All right.
So here is the principle I'm defending. I don't think Bobrisky needs to be present here for us to have a conversation about Bobrisky.
Okay, that was not my question, actually. I was just trying to let you know where I took that question from. So it was in responding to that question, you mentioned something about being the dialogue being open far beyond the left or the right. So I was now saying that from the conversation that has taken place today, there has been a trajectory there's a kind of general theme that seems to be a general, consensus. So I was thinking, in the spirit of what you observed, are there future plans to open this dialogue to more divergent views?
So, okay, it's not up to us to tell people whether or not to talk about Bobrisky. James and I, as I said in my preliminary remarks, have had a long-running conversation about Bobrisky, and we decided that it was time to organize something like this. And we invited people whose work we know. Rest assured that not everybody that we invited accepted our invitation, which is always what you have when you invite people to a colloquium or a symposium or a conference. But we wanted to get as many people from a variety of disciplinary and intellectual standpoints as possible.
Awesome.
There will never, just hold on. There can never be an exhaustive panel. Look, this is an emerging phenomenon. And actually, I'm going to challenge your point that there has been a unicity of views on this. If anything, I think James and I can say that we've heard more than we bargained for, just in terms of the perspective that people have offered, but also the different ways in which people have argued about Bobrisky. There are just two of us. Other people are completely free to organize their own forums. There can be, it will be a tragedy if after this, there weren't other people then, would say, oh, okay, you know what? Based on this particular strand or based on this particular perspective, I'm going to go in this particular direction. People should be free to do whatever they want to do without any reference to us. Does that make any sense?
It makes very, very good sense, and I'll look forward towards that too as well. Because
can I interrupt, please?
Yeah, one more question, please.
I think that, but I think we need to redirect it towards this panel. With all due respect, and to Professor Taiwo, I'm going to ask that we maybe save some time at the end for this very interesting discussion. But let's at least devote a little bit of attention to the presenters who have provided us with some discussion. Dr. Arrow, would you like to respond to something here, or would you like us to take some questions first?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I found it interesting that even though we all had the call, it was just heartwarming to hear people overlap, and that's the interesting thing about interdisciplinary perspective. So, but it's okay, whatever divergent view means, but I think we've all worked on different things and we did not even get in touch with each other. So I think that's the beauty about conversations, but there are also still rooms for more. If it's radical perspective, the speaker meant that's open, and that's why it's academic conversation.
So I see that Moji Solar Wilson has had a hand up both in the chat and now online. And so we'll take a question, please. Keep it to a question and relatively brief, and then we'll go to Rudy.
What an amazing panel you guys are, panelists. I love the diversity of thought. My name is Mojisola Wilson. I'm a Nigerian lesbian woman married to another Nigerian lesbian, the first set of lesbians to get married. You have no idea how excited I am that this conversation is happening. Bobrisky, without Bobrisky, and I'll ask my question after this thought, without Bobrisky and her antics, we will not be here having this conversation about the Nigerian LGBTQ community, because 95% of us are in the closet, right? So Bobrisky, I've heard a lot of different school of thought. My question to the people that sort of insinuated that Bobrisky was a threat to women, right? Bobrisky, when she originally came out as an entertainer. We all know that money moves Nigeria. So let's assume that a poor, very poor Nigerian queer person, if I may use the word queer, came out and said, I'm gay and I'm trans from the jump. Would we be here talking about Bobrisky? Because you have to remember, Nigeria moves, power moves Nigeria, money moves Nigeria. That's my question. And thank you again for having this symposium. Namaste.
Rudy, please go ahead. We'll take Rudy's question, and then we have a question online, and we'll ask the panelists to respond.
Well, what I was going to say is very much in line with what the previous commenter just put out, which is, I want to say that, I'll find a way to connect it. But I really appreciate, echoing what has just been said, like how your three talks kind of converged and spoke to each other. And the fact that it's inadvertent is just sort of a very lovely coincidence, but it is the serendipity of conferences like that, of this. So the opportunity is there. And yes, apropos of what the previous speaker just said, thank you, Bobrisky, for inspiring us to come together today. Bobrisky is not a perfect messenger at all, but nobody is. None of us is. So I guess I was really intrigued by Oloyinka's focus on strategic ambiguity on the part of Bobrisky, and then your other two presentations focus on the way other people are talking about Bobrisky. And so it made me think of if it's appropriate to think about it as like a dialectic where Bobrisky is strategically adapting to a kind of ecological setting, a discursive ecological setting, which is then informing that setting, which then evolves to respond to her, like the prayers and the other things like that. It just made me, so that's where like the fact that her strategic ambiguities don't protect her, well, they never will protect anybody 100% anyway. But the fact is that the system, the things she's being strategically ambiguous about change, and people respond to her. And so there's this back and forth, and that it's not really a question other than I wanted to just let the idea, your three talks together help me think about it in new ways. And I don't know if that makes you want to say something about the relationship between your talks.
Okay, the last question before we turn it back to the presenters, or last comment. I will read the question that appears in the question and answer, and then we'll have plenty of time to come back to people who've raised their hands. This one is, I'm a bit curious about whether the current experience of Bobrisky is as a result of cross-dressing or being queer, or is it related to violating legislation on handling the Naira? I'm aware Bobrisky has been cross-dressing for a while now before the present ordeal. Are there evidences connecting Bobrisky's present ordeal and cross-dressing? Any of the panelists may respond. Okay, thank you. Would anyone like to start our conversation or responses to the provocations and prompts that people have provided?
Yeah, let me start from the last person that says that this person has been doing it for a while before the present ordeal. And is there any evidence connecting the present ordeal and Bobrisky? Maybe we can only argue that there is no evidence if we refuse to say, right? Like the whole thing about the present ordeal started when Bobrisky took an award for Best Dressed Female. That was when it started, right? Like the video of Bobrisky spraying money has been all over the internet for a long time. You know that. And people regularly spray money at parties. So it was never an issue for the EFCC. It was never anything. And after she took that award, then the next thing did was, yes, like Matthew Crane said in his presentation, very dark man came out and offered this very provocation to the Nigerian police. And then you saw everybody triggered. Portable released a song and a lot went on. Because what they saw at that moment was another Kathleen Jenner moment, right? And there was this instinct that was triggered to push back. And the next thing you had was EFCC take a battalion to her house in Lagos to arrest one person over money spraying. And then look at that, even after this person has been to jail and come back, the amount of legal resources, amount of judicial resources that have been invested in a single individual, then it should tell you that we are not dealing with legislation on Naira handling, which people have done since that time, right? There's been a video circulating of a senator in Nigeria spraying Naira. Why have they not gone after that person? So let's not pretend, right, that the issue at stake is not the sexuality part. It was a provocation, right? Like most of you are gays, that's why you allow this person to thrive. And it is that provocation that they've been responding to by being, too heavily handed coming against Bobrisky. As for the other question of without money, would Bobrisky and the way she flaunts money, that's a really good question. We can also extend it and say without the internet, are we going to be sitting here and talking about that? Because the production of Bobrisky, you cannot extricate it from the internet culture, the content creation culture, and all the ways that is created this person allowed her to have up to 5 million followers, which is really huge, right? We talk about men of God being very influential. Dr. Badari has a book on that. But some of them don't have that kind of social media following. So it tells you something about this person as well that goes beyond just the fact that, the spectacle, the glamour, and, how the internet culture has almost structured a system of reward in that sense. And yeah, I'll leave the other panelists to answer the rest. Thank you.
Yeah, I will just add to what Dr. Adelakun has said. It's the larger picture. So I think sometimes it's typical in Nigeria for us to do the scapegoating, and where we leave the bigger matters and we go on the smaller ones. So it's a lot of conversations about the failed state of Nigeria itself, the corruption. It's also about attitude to non-conforming bodies and ideas, things that upset the societal norms that people are getting at. But again, there are some form of hypocrisy and double standards, and it's just murky. It complicates the whole idea about gender, sexual expression, expectation. And this is more complicated because of the economic or financial power that is involved. So it's complicated, and conversations around it will continue to be complicated and responses. And it speaks to the dialectical part of it, where Bobrisky does something, it's an opportunity to open up larger conversations. So we thought the issues had died down about spraying the money, which is ridiculous in itself. And now there are questions about EFCC investigating EFCC about corruption. So if we step back a little bit, we'll see it's not just about this case study, but larger issues that confront the Nigerian state. And for Bobrisky, I think with all forms of communication, we don't usually sit down to say, oh, this is how I'm going to respond. But that's why it's rhetorical in the sense that whatever context Bobrisky finds himself, herself, themselves, you can see the switch in the pronouns. They are adapting to that situation because of the consequences. I'm sure in the private space, there will be a different presentation. If Bobrisky should be in the Western world, for instance, there will be another presentation. So it's not static. It's adapting to the context and finding the best way to communicate and the limitations of all of this.
Yeah, I mean, if I'll jump into the discussions, I've been having a little issue with my network. It's yeah, so I mean, I see Bobrisky's witch hunting too from the way politicians, of course, weaponize this kind of narratives to draw attention to what should be non-issues. And of course, it wouldn't be the first in Nigeria. It's something that's even identifiable across the African continent. You look at the Kenyan example, you look at the Zimbabwean example, you look at Uganda. I mean, it's a recurring activity for politicians. And I mean, I read a lot of Dr. Adelakun's column, and I see how she tries to speak truth to power. But of course, politicians do not enjoy that. And for me, I see Bobrisky's saga as a way of distracting people from the main issues. And I mean, with how powerful the social media is nowadays, it's very easy to distract, particularly young people, from really holding the leaders to, responsible for the state of the nation. So when people are more interested in what's happening to Bobrisky, what VDM has, what video VDM has put up, and issues like these, or Big Brother Africa, I mean, it detracts from the real meat of the matter. And so it's just all a distraction. But of course, it still doesn't take away the agency of Bobrisky and what it holds for queer identifying Nigerians within the very toxic space in which they exist.
Great. We'll now turn to some of the hands that I've seen raised in the chat and other places here. There are like 2 or 3 different possible windows people can contribute. Obed Halisham. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Good evening, everybody. Okay, so my question is, I think Dr. Sorry, 1 second. I think Dr. Arawomo talked about strategic ambiguity, and I want to sort of ask a question around ambiguity, but I want to ask it around sex and pornography. So I, as a queer person living in Nigeria and being active in the Nigerian LGBTQ plus space, I sort of am privy to the role of porn and pornography in fact, in basically in every aspect of queer lives or queer living in Nigeria. Now, the thing is, Bobrisky made her ascent to the spotlight through Snapchat. And anybody who sort of knows Snapchat these days sort of knows that a lot of people think of Snapchat as a space where pornography is shared a lot. And we've also seen the utility of Snapchat to even current transgender figure, Jay Boogie, who has released several nudes on Snapchat. And we've seen Bobrisky in several risque poses, like Dr. Nanuga pointed out, and especially with the very interesting image that he opened his slides with. And there's also the fact that porn also ties figures like Very Dark Man, who also had his ascent to fame. For a lot of us, myself especially, the first place I saw Very Dark Man was Fun for 10K, right? And we all, those of us in the Nigerian LGBTQ plus community know him from those sort of places and from porn, right? In fact, I'm sure I even have a few of his videos on my phone. Now, the thing is, how do we link all these things together? The idea of sex, porn, sex work, sexual appeal. Bobrisky has, in strategically being ambiguous, has said she makes her money from rich partners. This is tying in very strongly into sex work. We've seen the rise of J Boogie. We see that when we've seen a lot of Nigerian transgender celebrities talk about how they sleep with men and they sort of start getting finer, and that's the beginning of their glow up. I'm just wondering if any of the panelists have like insights on these things and how these dynamics sort of seem to come together within the space, and how people like Bobrisky just sort of fit into all of this.
Thank you. We'll take another question from Lei Komalafe.
Thank you so much. This question is for Paul Ononuga, and I think Olade could also join in answering the question. First, a comment. I think it's apt to separate the personnel of Bobrisky in this conversation, because there is the past that speaks to the economic capacity that she has and the followership she has on online, which could be seen as some form of elite capture, to use the word of the younger Olufemi Taiwo, elite capture, because there are other persons, other non-binary persons or transgender persons within the Nigerian space, but who do not have the wherewithal to be in the public domain like she does. And then she has the capacity to then use that as some form of economic springboard for her own benefit. But I think we can separate that. So my question now is that how do we address what Bobrisky represents in terms of alternative sexuality within the Nigeria space, as separated from having such economic capacity to be able to exhibit and express that identity? Because the reason why we're speaking about Bobrisky right now, like a number of the speakers have said, is because she has the capacity to be in the limelight right there in the open space to Nigerians. So, but how do we address what Bobrisky represents within the larger population, for those who do not even have the means to be in the public domain? Because we're not so sure of how much persons are being maimed or killed for exhibiting these kinds of sexuality within spaces that are not right there in the open. Thank you.
Prof. Taiwo, you earlier had your hand up. Did you want to ask a question now? No? Okay. Temitope. Are you there?
Hello. Hello, can I be heard?
Yes.
Yes, I want to firstly thank the panelists for the interesting discussion. I mean, it has been extremely, interesting within the context of how, the panelists have been able to demystify, some of these important topics that we have been told, not just by the Nigerian state, but also by the conventional media that are not to be heard. And that's why the organizers must be congratulated for, putting up this kind of event. However, I want to say that I think that the missing link in some of the approaches that some of our persons have engaged themselves in today is the point around how economy, the role at which economy plays in even though we understanding the question of people's rights, community rights and what have you. And I think that is where we have to analyze, the role at which the backwardness of our economic situations have made it difficult for, in fact, the state and the people to recognize the necessity of individual rights. Why not saying that until we solve the entirety of the economic problems before we would come down to individual rights or not? Why not? Why I'm not making that kind of suggestion? I'm saying that, as it has been said by one of the panelists, that to some extent, and we cannot deny that fact, to a larger extent, a Bobrisky personality understand, the queer struggle, not within the context of the fact that, there's a necessity for individuals to have their rights, to their sexuality and what have you. I mean, there is no denying that fact, that for him, it's about class issue. And that is where class analysis comes in. Why not ignoring the fact that a Bobrisky needs to be discussed? I think ultimately, our research must go beyond the Bobrisky by, putting it across to the Nigerian states, to the faces of those, that are saying to us that we cannot have, individuals in this society putting their rights on the, on the table and what have you. We must, move the discussions to the, to other cycles. We are talking about, unknown personalities, if need be. We have a growing queer community in Lagos, for instance. I mean, there's a necessity for our researchers, and I think this also includes myself, to look at how mixed communities, have been surviving, because you cannot deny the fact that these communities represent a...
Yeah, please. I just want to give the panelists a chance to respond because we were running out of time. So if you could briefly respond to your question and the rest of the questions, thank you.
Yeah, the question on sex, the sexual, porn, and the digital. I work on Nigerian women's sexual discourses. I'm not into porn studies, but what I've realized that even with women that are in heterosexual relationship, the sex itself, it's secret. It is associated with shame, and so they rarely talk about it, even in the context of heterosexual marriages where it is accepted. So you can imagine the layer that comes with the sexual in non-conforming bodies. And I think there is this interest, there's this gaze that we can see in some of the responses of the audience, really wanting to know the details about Bobrisky's sexual lives. And that is one aspect where strategic ambiguity has been very, very adapted to say that I'm not going to go there, I'm not going to tell you about those I'm dating. So, and it's a way to also continue to feed the curiosity as to what is there. Then I think the digital media, also the visibility that it affords Bobrisky to do their business and, acquire more financial power. It also does the danger of not only putting Bobrisky out there and more attack, but at the same time, for people whose lived experiences are not obvious to the camera, neighbors could tell that, oh, this person is non-conforming, and get more attack because of the viral conversations that is happening. So it's something cyclical, and it impacts the other.
See, James is here as a kind of overlord. Oh, maybe that's a bit strong, but he's there. I see him in the back of my head, in the front of my head, telling me that I should ask you to the remaining panelists to please, within a minute or so, to give your responses if possible.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, go on.
Okay, who goes first? Okay, so let me just say quickly, let me add to what Dr. Arawoma has said, is that I think sex has become a mode of initiation into the digital public square because it's very sensational. So to launch yourself, to get attention, you leak your sex tapes. There's been a lot of leaked sex tapes, out there. And I think also because there's less danger in sex tapes now or sex, because again, rather than you being in a place physically, you are there digitally. We can see, but we can't touch. And so he can do his job, right? The things that we can see, does the job of exciting everybody, sensationalizing us, but that's where it stops. We can't come to your house. We don't know where you live. And so the individual is still protected. So people are using a lot of, that sex to launch themselves. And then to the question of, going beyond Bobrisky, I think there's nothing that we've done here today that says that people who want to go beyond Bobrisky cannot take their discussion further. And this whole argument about let's just move away from a particular to the abstract, I don't quite buy. We can talk about those two at the same time, right? Bobrisky is an entry point into a larger discussion that is actually very abstract, and which Professor Taiwo, started off with this morning. So there you have it. Thank you.
All right, very briefly, I mean, to separate Bobrisky's identity from his pursuit of economic power, financial power is actually going to be difficult. I see it more as a case of a footballer who enjoys playing football and gets paid for it. Yeah, so it's his person or a person, and I mean, by simply appropriating the affordances of the digital space, and if money comes with it, I mean, why not? So I guess that's how Bobrisky sees the whole, thing. And as regards, sex and porn and queerness, it's fascinating that a few years back, part of the reports from Pornhub was that Nigeria is one of the highest searchers of gay porn. And so when you correlate that with the favor with which people clamp down on queerness, I mean, you see the hypocrisy. So, of course, porn, sex, almost intertwined with humanity, and it will always manifest. Yeah, thank you.
I think we can please show our appreciation to all the panelists and the audience engagement.
Thank you. Yep, Dr. Yoko is going to give the closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Glenn Adams and the second panel. And thank you so much to everyone. We could wrestle with this topic forever. and that's probably because of what Roland Barthes describes as the spectacle of excess, talking about wrestling. And I think Bobrisky very nicely, brings us into that arena of wrestling and gives us a lot to talk about. And I just want to take a moment to thank Professor Taiwo for the incredibly great keynote earlier. That was a lot to think with. I also want to thank the two moderators, Professor Glenn Adams, Professor Molade Adumbe from the University of Michigan, University of Kansas, who graciously sponsored this event and also very nicely moderated the event. I'd like to thank all the panelists. We should do this again at some point later, hopefully. And of course, thank our audience. It's everybody, the audience deserves a special acknowledgement for being so patient. We appreciate your time. We're humbled and very grateful that you are here with us. And talking about doing this again, we'll probably send an email out on next steps. Professor Badara and I are already thinking about some kind of co-edited volume on this topic. We'll be inviting 2 to 3 other scholars, hopefully divergent scholars like somebody said earlier, and see how we go from there. But there is indeed the sense I get from our conversation that we need to do something with this. And Professor Badara and I will be very grateful to have your continued participation. So we'll send an email out in the next couple of weeks. So be on the lookout for that, especially the panelists. And again, I just want to thank everybody for being here. Thanks for giving us a large chunk of your weekend, and hopefully you get some rest after this. Matthias, especially in Mainz, it's very late at night. Also with Paul in Ekiti. So thank you, everybody. We look forward to seeing you guys again.
Thank you. We're very grateful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.